music from the second Conan movie, Conan the Destroyer, released way back in 1984, and this would be the main theme, Riders of Taramis. And of course, it's the first Conan movie where you get the great quote that was lifted more or less from Genghis Khan. When Conan is asked, "What is best in life?" he answers, "To conquer your enemy, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of the women." Great stuff. This is Hexes and Soldiers, episode 13. My name is Jason, and yeah, I remember the first Conan movie probably better than the second, actually. And I think I was just a little guy stuck at a babysitter's house watching this thing, and the beginning of that movie just blew me away, man. I was both enthralled and scared to death. But yeah, anyway, great stuff. So, hello and welcome back to Hexes and Soldiers, episode 13. Um, Looks like monsoon season has moved in here to New Orleans as rain, and more rain has paid us a visit. So, my immediate challenge, should I feel so inclined to accept, looks like it will be to stay dry, which shouldn't present too much of a problem in and of itself, but we'll see about that. I also just realized that being as I do now reside here in Voodoo Land, that means Mardi Gras, and I'm sure most of you know what that entails. And this next one coming up will be, if I go, which I don't see why I wouldn't, my first Mardi Gras. And of course, with all the floats and parades and whatnot that will be on display, I thought I'd get to work on my idea for a float, which was going to be a gigantic ASL rulebook on wheels with a couple chicks dressed as foam dice. I'd have each one of them tumble along the street here and there, but that idea was quickly shot down by my better half, so back to the drawing board, I guess. And as far as shout outs go, I'd first of all like to give a big welcome to any new subscribers. I see some new faces out there. And I'll also say congratulations to Mr. Anthony Salvaggio, as he was the first one to respond to the official Hexes and Soldiers t shirt promo. So he will be getting his shirt free. And I'll just add that if Anthony and everyone else that responded could send me an address so I know where to send these things, that would be greatly appreciated. Just let me know at hexesandsoldiers@gmx.com, all lowercase, and plan on getting these things printed up fairly soon, so keep an eye out for those. I'd also like to say thanks to you guys who have checked out the new blog at hexesandsoldiers.blogspot.com. Appreciate that. So enough dry preliminary stuff. Let's get right down to it, shall we? In the news, so I check Consum World quite regularly, as I'm sure a lot of you do, and I try and pull anything that is brand spanking new or somewhat interesting out of there and present it to you guys. But I noticed a kind of recent absence by way of any news, and apparently they are backlogged with stuff, but will be back on track starting this weekend. So I guess if you've been hitting them up looking for stuff, do so this weekend and you'll strike gold. I also found a long but interesting article a gentleman had done on that site called An Informal History of the Development of Panzerblitz by Arnold Arvold, I believe, unless I have that wrong. And this thing is informative and interesting. The guy obviously put a lot of time and effort into it, which is greatly appreciated. And his effort shows. It's A plus, what I would give him. So give it a read if you get a chance, as Panzer Blitz is among our industry's roots. So give respect to the Panzer Blitz. Regarding M&P, it seems that they're up to their old tricks again, having not posted any news since, I guess, late December. So let's hope the phrase "no news is good news" applies here. And same goes for GMT. Not much going on there. Looking at Academy Games, they have that FIFA France 1429 game knocking at the door. And I guess I missed this, but apparently Conflict of Heroes Awakening the Bear, the second edition, scored in the 98th percentile in an older Armchair General review. And I don't think that's very far off the mark, as I have played that thing and wholly agree with Armchair General. So, good job there. I also checked to see if the solo expansion for Conflict of Heroes will be coming out anytime during my life, but it looks like it's suffering a Hecapale syndrome, and I guess its fate has been thrown to the wind, and all we can do is hang our heads and continue to wait. Decision Games, I noticed, is offering Moves Online, which is an quote invaluable resource to supplement your gameplay and includes after action reports, design notes, previews, variants, optional rules and scenarios for decision games and strategy and tactics press games. You'll find new articles added regularly, including the most recent game releases. In addition to previous releases and future games, current articles cover games as far back as the past 3 years. End quote. And looks like a 1 year subscription or prescription if you look at gaming as kind of an addiction. For that would be about 1995. And then I came across another interesting read entitled SPI Died for Your Sins by Greg, and I'm not going to be able to say this right, Kostikian. And this thing recounts the death throes of SPI as it spasmed and flailed throughout its latter days. And additionally, you might want to do yourself some good and just check out his site in general at caustic.com, and that's spelled COSTIK.com, as there's a lot to keep you busy. This guy's posted a ton of stuff, and it's all fairly interesting. So, one last thing, and then I'll get to the top 10, and I would like to apologize to any ASL fans out there because this is the 13th episode now, and, well, it might appear that I have neglected ASL, and I don't wish to do that. It's not my intention. I am probably one of the biggest ASL fans around. As I've said in the past, this is the greatest game on earth. And I guess one of the reasons I've shied away from it is because there is this little thing called the two half squads. And this podcast has scoured literally every nook and cranny of their broadcasting basement when it comes to any and all things ASL. And man, I feel like to even say anything about it would just be to repeat or reiterate what they've already said. But that's not to say that I won't do a show or more on ASL. In fact, I had a show all ready to go regarding ASL, and I scrapped it for the time being for a few reasons. But I guess what I'm saying is, for all you ASL fans, please forgive me and know that I love the game dearly. And eventually I'll get around to it. But for now, if you guys are fiending for ASL stuff, I will direct you to the two half squads. So the top 10 for this week will be the top 10 odd or special units within war games. And I ran across a thread on Board Game Geek regarding this, which I found extremely interesting. And I haven't used everything from it, obviously, but I've taken 10 of the most interesting things and arranged them in my own numerical order, and also added a few things of my own that weren't on the list. But we'll start at the bottom, par usual, and work our way up the ladder. Number 10, It Never Snows. If any of you have played this game, or if not played it, at least opened it and examined the components, you might have found little yellow rubber ducks on the counters. And I don't know if this met with too much hostility. I think a couple people expressed their disinterest in these counters as far as their aesthetics, but I don't have a problem with it. These little yellow ducks, of course, represent the British little boats that were used to cross the river Number 9, The Great War in Europe Deluxe Edition apparently has a young Hermann Göring counter. Don't come across those too often, I don't imagine. Number 8, uh, for all you ASL fans, we've got from Waffen SS 2, Hitler's Fireman, a Hitler counter. And interestingly enough, this Hitler counter has ratings. And Hitler, for those of you interested in combat, would be a 6 neg 0. So that's good stuff. Number 7, Strategy and Tactics in Country Vietnam 1965 to 75. Here you go, Mr. Young, fan of Vietnam stuff, I believe. Has both a Hanoi Jane and Walter Cronkite counter, each bearing a factor of -1, and that, of course, is Jane Fonda. So I'm going to assume their effect on the game is not a positive effect. Number 6, Case Blue, and I think a couple other games have this as well. They've got their sausage counters, and this has to do with supply, I believe, or something like that. And then Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 has the tree bark soup counters, which I think only the Russians benefit from this, and that's another kind of supply thing, I think. Number 5, Red Winter has Finnish field kitchens, and I talked about this briefly in another previous show, but the Russians, during a particular attack historically, were pretty much freezing and starved, and the Finns were doing fairly well for themselves with a few saunas and some hot food. And during a particular attack, the Russians caught wind, literally, of Finnish field kitchens being used and just lost all will to fight and started heading for the food. So that's that. Number 4, Blood on the Snow. The Battle of Soimosalmi has a Soviet motorized brass band. While serving no purpose in combat, if the Soviet player can get it off the map, the propaganda value is worth 2 victory points. So, a motorized brass band. Wow, only the Soviets, huh? Number 3, Summer Storm Battle of Gettysburg has a zombie Stonewall Jackson counter. And regarding zombies, Storming the Reich also has zombies in the form of a Nazi counter. So, for all you Walking Dead fans, pick those games up. Number 2, Bitterwoods 4th Edition. There is an actual Fraulein counter, and apparently she can stop the advance of Panzer Lehr by flirting with the commander, Fritz Bayerlein. Historically, this actually happened and caused Panzer Lehr half a day's worth of delay. Additionally, Randy Heller, the designer, has his own SS unit, which is interesting, if not in so much as he chose an SS unit to represent himself. I won't read too much into that. Finally, number 1, top of the list, DAC 2 has the 10th Armada Mobile Bordello unit, and this apparently consisted of 24 women and was a unit captured at Beta From. Appears in the game only to show the luxury with which Italian officers lived in during the initial campaign. And it says use any desired mobile bordello rule. So there you go. Top 10 odd or special units within war games. And then also another one that a lot of you might not be aware of is the I'll throw this in the honorable mention category. Mine Dog counter from Streets of Stalingrad. And I kid you not, this game has on this counter a silhouette of a dog with a mine on its back. And hey, these were used. Soviets trained these dogs to head for panzers and get under them, and the mine would detonate. So sounds barbaric, but hey, you do what you got to do, and I'm sure in a lot of respects this was quite effective. Well, the Germans had a similar mechanical thing with their Goliaths, but wow, to train a dog to do this, wow, that takes dedication. So there's your top 10 list for this week, and then As far as reviews, meat of the matter, and after action report, I'm going to kind of wrap all three into one here for this episode and let you guys know that I've been playing SPI's. I'm kind of on a SPI kick if you hadn't noticed. Old SPI game, Turning Point, The Battle of Stalingrad from 1972. So this thing is older than I am, and I have hit the 40 mark. So wow. And then this game attempts to recreate the Russian offensive operation Uranus. A couple of giggles, I'm sure, right? Yeah. In 42, which, if you don't know, historically resulted in the encirclement and elimination of the entire German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. And I came across an interesting tidbit of information recently regarding this operation, and specifically the 22nd Panzer Division, which was, as a direct result, smashed by this Soviet offensive. But the story goes that prior to this offensive, the Germans dug their panzers in a bit, and you got to remember it's freezing during this time, so anything and everything is used to keep warm. And well, I guess they had access to some straw, which was brought into the tanks to help keep warm. And what happens is you get mice that begin to nest inside the tanks. So when it comes time to move out, the story goes that they only make it a little ways when electrical fires cause a number of them to fail. And as it turns out, this is a direct result of the mice that had been living in the tanks and chewing on the electrical wire insulation. So the exact numbers of panzers that were affected by this is up for debate. Some say as many as 50 tanks were affected by these mice, and I think that's a bit high. But according to historian Anthony Beaver, he talks about this as well. And the division only had as few as 30 serviceable panzers. So obviously something was affecting them. But I thought this was fascinating, and wouldn't you know, this is in fact represented in a game, that game being Steel Panthers. And unfortunately, this is a computer game. We won't hold that against it, but still, it's pretty cool that they take this into account within the game. So, back to SPI, um, and like their Arnhem game, which I talked about last episode, Turning Point is, again, a simple game, but it packs a lot of excitement, in my opinion. The map is your paper map and fairly austere, with only three different colors, and the counters are your basic SBA counters. Nothing fancy going on there. There's a single accordion style sheet of 8 pages of rules, and the game turns consist of three things: a movement phase, a combat phase, and an additional motorized movement phase. So this thing has really been boiled down. Movement, zones of control, and your combat are fairly conventional. Nothing new here. The combat results table for this game is one of the most brutal I've seen in a while, even in newer games. And on the Soviets' first turn, they receive a combat bonus. And it isn't long at all before the Soviets begin racking up German, and specifically German Allied units. When I played this thing, the whole top, pretty much top half of the map was littered with eliminated German units and hardly any eliminated Russian units. I think supply, though, is the backbone of this simulation. And when it comes to supply for the Soviets, you're looking at, well, they have three ways of being supplied, first of all. Either by rail in the north and the east, or the eastern map edge, and they can also be supplied by a mobile supply unit. The supply length to any rail is the longest at 8 hexes, and the supply length to a map edge or mobile supply unit has a maximum length of 4 hexes. And when you exceed these lengths, um, the results are either unsupplied which halves movement and attack, or isolated, which halves movement and completely forbids attacks. In either case, defense is unaffected. So the Germans must simply trace supply of no more than 12 hexes to any railroad that extends off map in the north or the west. And unlike the Soviets, the Germans can never suffer from isolation. So that's interesting. Another interesting aspect of the game is the continuous line rule. And I don't know of a lot of games or any that have this. I really liked it. I thought it was quite, I don't want to say ingenious, but I thought it was clever. And this basically consists of each side maintaining a front line of contiguous units or their zones of control, and a player is penalized for any holes that might open up throughout the game at the end of the turn. So that was pretty cool, and I had a big gaping breach in the middle of my German lines pretty early on that presented a lot of trouble. um, there are air units, but I got the sense that these were merely added for historical flavor, and their function is fairly minimal and can be easily countered by an opposing player's air units. Air units in the game can either provide close support for ground units, attack other air units' ground elements. You can use them for interdiction in an attempt to disrupt supply, and also you can use them as combat air patrols. And, you know, I wish this could have been implemented, I don't know how, but differently or even abstractly worked into the levers and gears of the game. But hey, this is, after all, the good mold days of gaming, so you can't expect too much, at least yet. Victory is based on a point system. You get points for units eliminated, which is pretty straightforward. The Soviets can pretty much win hands down if they can capture Rostov, which isn't exactly as easy as it might seem at first glance. They pretty much have to race all the way across the map and hold that and maintain supply. So, related to this, the Axis do in fact get 1 point for every hex of distance between Rostov and the nearest supplied Soviet unit. So, I guess there's your balance when you look at all the eliminated German units. Um, there are ample amounts of reinforcements throughout this game and a fair amount of scenarios in addition to the historical scenario. And as far as the optional rules go, you have Russian Army Integrity and the German Insanity rule, which is pretty cool. But this attempts to ensure German units remain in place and ignore anything that might be developing in other sectors. And to reflect this, Axis units that start the game in their own fortified hexes may not move during turn one. And additionally, Axis units set up in their fortified hexes, and you have to do this if you're doing the historical setup. You have to set up in fortified hexes. Additionally, they cannot attack during turn one. So, Insanity rightly said. As a side note, the designer puts kind of a disclaimer in the rules and says, quote, players will find that this rule unbalances the game seriously and should only play it for historical information, end quote, which I found amusing. And finally, to my delight, there is a significant portion of design notes. Thank you, sir, for that. Thank you, any designer. There's no reason, as you design this game, that you can't add some facts regarding the design of the game and its development along the way for us. So it's always appreciated. So yeah, basically I had a blast playing this and would definitely play it again. In fact, I'd love to play it a half a dozen times and do a serious study regarding tactics and strategy within this game. But I doubt I'll play it that many times. So should you run out and try and locate this thing? Is what you're asking me, and I would say not necessarily. Again, just like with Arnhem, it depends on your taste. If you're into the roots of wargaming and want to wax nostalgic, and you want a relatively simple, fast, and exciting simulation of Operation Uranus, then yeah, pick up a copy. Like I said, the combat results table is bloody, which makes for uh, fun, fast moving kind of stuff. You'll see what I mean. But you'll also find it a pleasure to play as either the Russians or the Germans, regardless of which side you choose. You're going to have plenty to consider. You're not just going to sit idly and react throughout the game. I felt like as the Germans in Arnhem, it was kind of a drag because you are more reacting than acting, as opposed to the British, who are more acting than reacting, unless you're just a completely awful player and find yourself screwed early on. But so yeah, otherwise, this thing was passed up a long time ago by better, prettier games. But hey, it's up to you. So there is Turning Point, and we still have some time. So I think before I cut out of here, I will share with you some books on wargaming, and I have a couple. There are a few out there. Obviously, I don't have all of them. I don't even know that every one of them is worth owning, but a couple that I can recommend to you because I have read them would be The Best of Board Wargaming by Nicholas Palmer. And I got an old hardback copy of this I found at an antique store. About 190 pages. And he has another book that came out before this. I can't recall the title. But this one's pretty good. And he goes into a lot of the. Of course, this is severely old and only talks about the older games. But the ones that he does talk about um, were the highlights of their day. And you've got Corson Pocket in here, for instance, Highway to the Reich. And he has a rating system for each of these games. And the way he rates it is he has, at the end of each review, there are 5 subjective evaluations. He has excitement level, which is encoded as an exclamation mark. And this is how exciting is an average turn? And it goes from 0, which is boring, to 100, which is thrilling. Rules clarity, which is coded with a question mark. And this entails how complete and free from ambiguity are the rules. And 0 being incomprehensible to 100, which would be crystal clear. Complexity, which is coded with a percentile symbol. And this regards how difficult and intricate is the simulation, 0 being trivial and 100 being insanely complex. Then realism coded R. How close does the game come to the simulated conflict, with 0 being totally artificial and 100 being utterly convincing. And finally, solitaire playability, which is coded by an S, and 0 being not being able to be played at all, solitaire, and 90 equals no problem, and anything over 90, he says, would be especially good solo. And what I plan to do with some of these in the future is post some of his reviews on my blog regarding specific games. He doesn't have anything in here about Turning Point, the Battle of Stalingrad. But for example, Panzer Group Guderian excitement level, he has 80. And rules clarity, he has 100. So crystal clear. Complexity, he has 30. And realism, he has 60. And then solitaire, he has a 100. So not a bad review there. And of course, with each title, he'll give an account regarding what the game's about, what it plays like, and then, as I said, at the end of each account, he'll give these 5 rankings. So, The Best of Board Wargaming by Nicholas Palmer. Pick that up, or I guess you could pick up his previous book, but I don't have any firsthand experience with that, so I can't recommend it. You also have Peter Perla's staple, The Art of Wargaming, and he gives a real nice history of wargaming, a nice glimpse into the industry at the time of which it was written, and we're looking at a publication date of 1990. And interestingly enough, Naval Institute Press of Annapolis, Maryland published this, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was um, the same publisher of Tom Clancy's Hunt for Red October, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, it's just some good stuff, and like I said, he goes into a little bit of history of the war game, some principles like the nature of war games, designing war games, developing them, playing them, analyzing them, and integrating war games with operations, analysis, and exercises. And then last part of the book is what he calls prospects for the future, Navy war gaming today, what of the future, hot wash up, an appendix with questions for war game analysis, etc. So not a bad book either. And then there are a number of books I got my eye on that I don't have. One of them being Philip Sabin's Simulating War, and like I said, I don't have this, but it looks damn good. And if you go to the Amazon site, you can order it. And it says over the past 50 years, many thousands of conflict simulations have been published, which bring the dynamics of past and possible future wars to life. Philip Sabin used such techniques in his acclaimed previous book, Lost Battles, to cast new light on Greek and Roman land engagements. In this new work, he explores the theory and practice of conflict simulation as a topic in its own right, based on his 30 years of experience in designing war games and using them to educate both military and civilian students. Simulating War sets conflict simulation in its proper context, alongside more academically familiar techniques such as game theory and operational analysis. It explains in detail the analytical and modeling techniques involved, and it teaches you how to design your own simulations of conflicts of your choice, as do Philip Sabin's master students. So, the book provides 8 simple illustrative simulations of specific historical conflicts, complete with rules, maps, and counters. These games have all been employed successfully in class, and you can use them to see exactly how conflict simulation works. And within this book was a game called Hell's Gate, and I guess it got enough response that he went on to publish this separately from the book. But this involves the Course in Pocket, of course, in Winter 44. And then, as it stated, his previous book, Lost Battles, also of note because within that book he developed a system of gaming with ancients, which can be easily recreated and used. So his books are not just to be read, but to be interacted with in a sense by way of games. So Philip Sabine, and I believe he teaches at I forget the name of it, college in England, and also on YouTube. I believe somewhere, I don't remember the title of it. There is a video of him teaching in class and talking about war games, and his students, it seems like, mostly consist of military types, but also civilians, and level some pertinent questions at him, which he handles rather adeptly. So the guy knows his stuff. So there's some books for you if you want to approach wargaming from a slightly different angle. And to recap, The Art of Wargaming by Peter Perla and The Best of Board Wargaming by Nicholas Palmer. Both of those out of print, but you should be able to find it. Either of those on, if not eBay, then Amazon.com. And then, of course, Philip Sabin's Simulating War, Studying Conflict Through Simulation Games. And with that said, I think I'll wrap it up here, and we'll keep this one a little shorter than usual. That's okay. Just say thanks for coming along for the ride, and as far as the next show goes, looks like I've got carte blanche, so you'll just have to wait and see what I cook up. So, As usual, thanks for listening and keep gaming.